Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last day of the CDIO Asian Regional Meeting 2021. We're going to start the day with our first keynote speech very soon. I remind you that during the speech, your microphones and cameras will remain disabled, but you may at any time use the hand raise feature in Microsoft Teams to express your intention to ask a question. After the completion of the speech, a 10-minute period will be dedicated for questions. Attendees who raise their hands will be given the permission to ask their questions verbally, one after another, within the allocated Q&A session time. Now, we're going to start off the day by welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Juha Kontio, the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Business in Turku University of Applied Science, Finland, who will present his speech entitled Educational Leadership and Faculty Development.
Okay, good morning everybody and greetings from Finland. I will share my screen. So now you should be able to see it. And yes, and coming from the Turku University of Applied Sciences and working there as a dean in the Faculty of Engineering and Business, and I'm going to talk to you about this educational leadership and faculty development, and maybe more on the faculty development side, but anyway, altogether my content will be, let's try to change the slides. Okay, so I'm going to give you a short introduction here and then talk about the elements that we have in CDIO regarding the faculty development, then some possible actions that we have identified within the CDIO, and then some examples from our university, and finally some conclusions. Let's start with the introduction here, and then first of all some words about myself. I have my background in information systems and computer science, and I've been involved with CDIO since 2007 when our university joined CDIO, and since then I've been acting as co-leader in the European CDIO region and also member in the CDIO Council. We hosted the 2016 conference chair, so a lot of involvement and an experience from the CDIO initiative. And if we start with this, I think we all share this general idea that we would like to educate better engineers. And to educate better engineers, we have these three key questions that we need to answer. First of all, we need to understand the need of the engineers, the role of the professionals, and the context where they are working. In addition to that, we need to know and find out the knowledge, skills, attitudes that our students should have once they graduate from our programs. So basically the program learning outcomes. And in addition to these two, we need to find the ways how we educate them, how we make sure that they really get these skills and this knowledge. So and that brings us to the topics relating to curriculum, teaching, learning, workspaces, assessment, etc. And when you are thinking of these three questions, there is this question about that who is going to do all this? Who is the one that is doing all these and answering these questions? And the answer is quite simple. The answer is, of course, the faculty. And that means that we have to take good care of our faculty, because they are doing the thing. They have the key role on on providing this kind of education and making sure that the engineers are such that we are aiming for. I have also used this kind of picture like superheroes of when talking about the faculty, because sometimes it feels that the faculty has to be like a superhero, because there are so much things that they need to master and know. It's quite typical that when you think about your faculty, professors, lecturers, personal teachers, or whatever you call them, that they have to be very good or even excellent in variety of teaching and learning methods. They have to know the right, correct assessment methods. They have to know what's happening within the industry. They have to know and be able to do real engineering activities, and also they should have a good network within the industry. So a lot of requirements regarding the faculty or the personnel. And furthermore, they need to master the engineering knowledge skills as well as the pedagogical skills in teaching, learning, assessment. And if you think about the engineering aspects that you have to master, we could say that, okay, there are both this technical side, the technical knowledge itself, but also the engineering skills, and especially within the CDIO framework, we emphasize a lot that they have a meaningful relationship there. So not only the technical knowledge and the theoretical side, but also the practical side, they should go hand in hand, and in that way we would ensure that the graduates are as good as they should be there. And from the pedagogical aspects, then maybe this picture, this constructive alignment that we use a lot in CDIO is one of the key ideas there, that you do have the intended learning outcomes, and based on those you have to decide, you have to find the best teaching learning activities that are most appropriate and suitable for achieving these learning outcomes. And once you have these two, then you have to think about the assessment, that how you are going to assess that students have really achieved these learning outcomes by using these teaching and learning activities that you have done there. And of course, you need to understand that if you change one of them, any of them, then it means that you have to rethink, maybe change the way that you are doing the other things there. And this is also something that comes from the faculty skills and the competencies, because it's not very easy to combine all these, and it means that the faculty has to be very skillful on providing this kind of education there. And furthermore, if we think about the vision that we have written at some point within the CDIO, that what kind of education we provide, we have written that, okay, the education should stress the fundamentals of the professional, and it should be set in the context of conceive, design, implement, operating systems, products, even services. And within doing that, we have certain kind of curriculum there. There are a lot of student design build projects. We are integrated professional skills with engineering skills there. We are using a lot of active and experimental learning, and of course we are constantly improving our education using quality assurance, quality enhancement methods. And again, if you think all these elements that we have here, it's something that the key role is in the faculty and faculty competence to do all these is essential, that we can provide this kind of education there. Okay, so now we have set the context there that okay, faculty is the important part of CDIO education and education in higher education in engineering. And if we think about CDIO, then that how CDIO supports faculty development. We do have the 12 standards plus the 4 optional standards. I guess you have already seen many of these standards before earlier during this meeting. But for faculty development, we have 2 standards there. We have the standard number 9 and standard number 10 that are focusing on faculty competence and faculty teaching competence. So basically, if we think about these 2 standards, standard number 9 is focusing more on the engineering aspects, the skills that our faculty should have within the engineering. And then standard number 10 is more focusing on the pedagogical aspects and the pedagogical skills that faculty should have. So it's the engineering skills, it's the pedagogical skills that both need to be mastered by the faculty. And if we take a look on the standards in more detail, we can see, for example, in the standard number 9, you can find the full description from the CDIO.org website, of course. There are some elements that I have highlighted here. First of all, it's the professional engineering practice that this standard is about. And there are some examples that what you could do. I will come back to those later. And also one comment that I have marked here is that within the rational section is that the engineering professors tend to be experts in research and knowledge base of their disciplines. But how about the experience in practice, in practical engineering, in business and industrial settings? And this standard is about improving and enhancing that kind of faculty competence there and how we can support that. And if we think about the standard number 10, that's more, as I mentioned already earlier, it's more about the teaching competencies and how we can support our faculty to achieve such skills and knowledge that they are capable of doing all the activities that we are aiming to provide in a CDIO program. There are some examples here that, for example, integrated learning experiences, active experiential learning, and also the assessment of student learning. So a lot of elements that these are supporting. And now that you have shortly seen the standard descriptions there, I have drawn this picture showing that the standards number 9 and 10, they are both very strongly connected to the other standards. So we need to have support for the faculty on the engineering competencies and also on the teaching competencies, because the other standards that we have in CDIO are strongly coming from the skills and competencies that the faculty have. So to be able to provide these other elements that we have within the CDIO, it means that this faculty need to have competencies on doing that, and that's why the faculty development is very important within the CDIO context, and that's why there are different ideas on how we could support that. If you think about all the standards, we had 12 original standards there, and in this slide, you already see how many, 6, 7 of those. So many of the standards are coming out from the standard 9 and 10 actually. So it's key elements in the development. And what can we do then? So if we think about possible actions in the standard descriptions, there were examples that were provided. For example, this kind of actions that you could take. So you could provide a possibility for your faculty members to work a short period or a longer period in industry. So you provide them some kind of professional leave. Or another idea is that you could do a lot of research-oriented projects together with industry colleagues, and in that way you gain and see real engineering activities there. Or you could also use this engineering practice as a promotion criteria, or even when you hire a new person in your faculty, you also check not only the academic merits, but also the real engineering merits. And that is at least something that within the CDIO we are emphasizing a lot. And also you could provide some kind of professional development experiences within the university. So providing such possibilities that you can gain these professional engineering activities and tasks within your work. And from the pedagogical side, then there are these proposals that we should provide or support faculty to participate in different external development programs where they can improve their pedagogical skills. We might organize internally different forums to share ideas and best practices. And also this could be the pedagogical skills could be one element that you emphasize when you hire new people or when you think about the promotions and things like that. So these are already provided in the standards as an examples, and then of course it's the university itself who has to decide how they are going to implement these kind of elements there. We had some discussions within the CDIO community during the last 2-3 years. We have held different workshops and roundtables where we have discussed about the faculty development and what kind of activities there are already present in different our CDIO universities and what kind of elements they are using and doing. And we actually had 3 different questions that we worked on. First of all, we wanted to identify the existing practices, but also identify what kind of challenges we have in faculty professional development currently. And then we tried to develop some activities that the CDIO community could do and how we could, as a big group of universities and engineering educators, how we could support each others. And we came up with quite interesting ideas and examples. For example, the existing practices that the CDIO community presented are some of them are listed here. There are some mandatory elements in different universities, while others are just possibilities for the faculty. For example, there are universities where faculty members has to have a mandatory certificate on pedagogical training. So the pedagogical skills has to be there, and you have to prove it with the certificate. Many universities are providing courses on teaching and learning, focusing on different parts of teaching and learning. There has been some trainings about CDIO, digital skills, flipped learning, and so on. And then also in some universities, to get a permanent position in a university, there is this requirement that you have a certain amount of mandatory work experience. And then there are other elements, other examples mentioned also. For example, some universities are doing some kind of internal reviews of teaching practices and using the colleagues within the university to provide some feedback and input on how to improve the activities and how to support learning and how to improve the teaching and learning activities altogether. But at the same time, we also identified some challenges there. For example, even though that you might have the mandatory work experience requirement once you hire new people, once they have been working with you for several years, the industry experience is getting old. That is one challenge, that how you tackle that. And also one of the challenges that many universities mentioned is that the university policies doesn't always support active involvement in teaching and learning development. Rather, they are quite often focusing on the research activities and academic research especially. And then, of course, one of the challenges is that even though that we want to improve our teaching and learning, how about our students? Are they ready to adapt the active teaching learning methods and the innovative ways of doing things? And the industry periods, many or actually all universities said that, okay, that would be wonderful, but how would you fund it? Where you find the funding to do that? So there are a lot of challenges also connected with this faculty development here. Then for the CDIO community, we set out some goals that we could promote. For example, from the Standard 9 perspective, we could say that, okay, let's have more industry speakers in our meetings, apply funding, organize factory visits as part of our meetings. That's one part. And then from the Standard number 9 perspective, we do have the active learning workshops within our meetings, maybe have some other active learning workshops there, advanced version of that, share examples, have discussions with the colleagues, because they have been quite fruitful when you talk with the colleagues from the different universities, that how they are doing it and so on. There are a lot of other elements that we have proposed as well. And then we think about these kind of elements in more general elements, that maybe we could provide or prepare some kind of tools, materials for supporting the CDIO program leadership. So maybe by providing a summary that what it means and how you can do things and how you can promote CDIO activities within your own university. Maybe also have some comments from the industry and in that way give more strength for the development activities. And then there are many other elements that we identified as well. Okay. So these are the things that we have been talking within the CDIO community. Some of them are progressing. and some are still kind of that we need to rethink and formulate them. I will now move to some practical examples that what we have done in our university. So from Turku University Applied Sciences, our university is an innovative and multidisciplinary higher education institution taken directly from our presentation PowerPoint set, and we are one of the key idea in our university is the multidisciplinary. You might have noticed, for example, the faculty name that I come from, Faculty of Engineering and Business, that we are really combining these two. In Finnish context, we are one of the biggest universities, and our graduates are practice-oriented professionals. I come from the University of Applied Sciences. It means that they are very practice-oriented and actually implementing CDIO. I might say it is more easier to us than a traditional scientific university, because a lot of the elements that CDIO emphasizes are already present in a University of Applied Sciences context. And you could say that our goal is to be this kind of yellow tulip there, trying to do things differently and in that way test different things and be innovative, being in the front line of engineering education and education altogether. The Faculty of Engineering is 7 schools, and all schools strongly connected with the industry around us, and the business studies are connected there as well. I mentioned in the beginning that we have been in CDIO since 2007, and there's a diagram or picture on the left side of the slides that what have happened since 2006. Actually, we started already in 2006, but joined in 2007. There has been many elements that have something to do with faculty development, whether it is the periods in industry or whether it's something to do with the pedagogical skills. And this has really been important part of the development activities. The diagram stops in 2014, but since then there has been a lot of elements and improvements as well. Let's go this way. And nowadays the key elements that we have are mostly focusing on these things that we have there. We have set general principles in our teaching and learning. And if you think about this picture, you can see again that there are a lot of things where the faculty are in essential role. There are a lot of involvement with the industry, a lot of things where you are working with the industry and kind of improving your own skills and experience. And also there are a lot of elements which require a lot of pedagogical skills that you need to master as well. And then these elements that you see on these slides, they are common to all our bachelor programs, whether they are from the mechanical engineering or the information and communication technology or from the chemical engineering. They all share these elements within their curriculum, and that also helps us to support our faculty on improving and developing the faculty competencies. Maybe some words about where we are at the moment. In our university, to get a permanent vacancy for teaching related positions, you have to have the right degree, either the master or doctorate. You have to have the pedagogical certificate equivalent to 1 year of studies, and you need to have the relevant industry work experience. at least 3 years. So 3 elements to get a position in our university: the degree, the pedagogical skills, and also the work experience that you have to have. Then, of course, there are other positions, maybe more research-oriented positions, where we emphasize more on the degree and then the work experience. And there you might not need to have the pedagogical skills, but then, of course, the task and the work that you are doing is different. What has happened since 2006, 2007, when we started, is that the teaching and learning has changed a lot. Those people that we had in 2007, 2008, and so on, they were still thinking that they are teachers, they are teaching things. But nowadays, our teachers are more like coaches, and that has also meant that we had to have a lot of internal trainings and education for our staff, that they are able to change the mode of teaching and learning to the coaching kind of activities. The role of applied research and development has increased a lot. There are daily industry collaborations in various levels of our programs, whether they are the first year students or the fourth year students. A lot of industry collaboration there. And if you think about the faculty competencies, then you could say that our faculty members, since they work constantly together with the industry in teaching and learning, and also they work and take part in the research and development projects, the applied ones done together with the industry, they kind of learn and get experience on engineering activities all the time. And from the pedagogical aspect side, we do provide internal pedagogical trainings and sharing of best practices. There are a lot of different occasions where you have the opportunity to tell what you have been doing and how you have been doing different things in your program. And also we are constantly evaluating and developing our teaching and learning, and that also means that our faculty need to be skillful on pedagogical ideas as well. And maybe one of the key points that I want to emphasize here is that the faculty development, it is not something that you can take out from the context. It's part of the other development actions, and actually many of the other development actions are dependent on the faculty development. So it's very crucial that you keep the faculty in good shape, and they are capable of doing and providing this education and activities that you have been planning. So maybe one slide still as a conclusion there. You might be familiar with this kind of study that Ruth Graham did in 2018, where she studied on many engineering universities and came up with this kind of list that what are the pedagogical features, the distinctive features that the recognized leaders of engineering education share. And if you go through the ideas what we have there, it's again something where the faculty has the key role. They have the main role on providing and doing this kind of activities, and it is difficult task for the faculty leaders to organize this faculty development, but as you have seen, there are some examples, some elements that you can use and by step do these kind of activities. Okay, so maybe that's all that I have to say at this point, and thank you for listening, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Juha, for your valuable speech and for respecting the allocated time. Please to use the hand raise feature to express your intention to ask your questions, and you will then be given the permission to use your microphone and camera. Professor Hassam, the floor is now yours to ask your questions.
Good morning. Talk is unique in Finland in terms of the title. I'm aware of Helsinki and aware of Tampere universities. They don't mix the engineering with the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, might be you are unique in this regard. The question is how you incorporate all these CDIO aspects into the business part of your college, of your faculty.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you have mentioned is totally related to the engineering programs and so on. Is there anything related to the business dimensions?
Basically, all the things that I have presented are such that we are doing in our business programs as well.
Okay,
for example, the pedagogical steps, the 4 steps that we have there, our business programs are joining the same activities as the engineering programs. And for example, the capstone projects within our 3rd year of studies, they have business students and engineering students working together.
Great.
So, and all the faculty development activities, they are also relevant with the business faculty or business people. So we have tried to provide such context where our own activities are as close as the real activities in the industry and in the businesses. So the engineers and business people are working together even during their studies and then in our teaching and learning activities.
In the almost the final slide, when you talked about the students and so on, the first part of that slide is talking about engaging the students with research.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the first one. Have you developed some experience in that regard?
Yes. Well, first of all, our idea is that from the day one, all our students in our faculty, they will take part in this kind of project hatchery, where our research groups provide tasks for the 1st year students, and the 1st year students start doing something that the research group have asked, and then the main goal is that they kind of familiarize themselves with the research activities, and they also understand what project activities are. And since we start from the 1st year students and they move then on the 2nd year, 3rd year, and so on, they already have experiences on project activities. So it's easier for them to join the more challenging tasks that we provide in the later years.
Are these project-based learning or actual research?
I would say that both.
Both. Okay, good.
Both. But I must emphasize the research activities that we do, they are always the applied research.
Okay, fair enough.
So the connection to the real life challenges and the tasks coming from the industry, they are real, like challenges that the organizers have right now. So we are trying to solve and apply the existing knowledge and create new things out of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
CDIO theories and concepts. And one of these projects is a design-build project, design-build a skyscraper model. There are some information given, for example, the context regarding society, also some constraints, organizational constraints, resource constraints, Also, they require testing approach to test the model students were requested to build. And of course, the learning outcomes for this course. Students were requested to create technical drawings, to build a physical model, and to test this model. Now, the resulting question here is, how does this PBL project cover CDIO syllabus skills? And we actually see that it is covering a number of syllabus items. For example, 2.1.1, problem identification and formulation, because students had to identify obstacles from the given conditions, and they had to formulate solutions to these obstacles. It's also covering 2.3.4, trade-offs, judgment, and balance in resolution, because students had to identify these tensions and factors in order to resolve through trade-offs. They also had to choose and employ solutions that balance various factors, that resolve tensions and optimize the system as a whole. Furthermore, it's covering critical thinking, because students had to analyze the statement of the problem and they had to choose logical arguments and solutions. It's also covering time and resource management, because students had to discuss task prioritization, they had to explain the importance and urgency of tasks, and to explain efficient execution of tasks. Furthermore, this project is covering the syllabus item 3.1.1, forming a to identify team roles and responsibilities. It's covering team operation, because students had to choose goals and the agenda of their team. They had to practice effective team communication, as well as planning, scheduling, and execution of the project. And they had to formulate solutions to problems that were coming up. It's also covering the syllabus item 4.3.2, defining function, concept, and architecture, because students had to identify necessary system functions and behavioral specifications. Furthermore, it's covering the design process, and students had to choose requirements for each element or components derived from system-level goals and requirements, as well as analyzing alternatives in design. And last but not least, it's covering the item 4.4.3, the utilization of knowledge in design. Why? Because students had to utilize technical and scientific knowledge and to practice creative and critical thinking, as well as problem solving. So the coverage of this item is somewhat typical for PBL projects, even if the nature of the project is different. Those are items that are typically covered by PBL projects. Now I'm moving to the third part of my speech, the CDIO and PBL environment. And I want to take a little bit more time regarding this section of my speech. I want to look at both the impact of the sequence of theory and hands-on, and secondly, the impact of feedback. So let's start with the impact of the sequence of theory and hands-on learning activities. Now, when we look at also at anecdotal evidence, then it seems that the theory needs to be covered first before students are able to do hands-on learning activities. Now, before I come to the experiment we did at ACK, and which seems to indicate actually something different than what we find usually in literature, and what we usually find among engineering educators, I quickly want to show how the impact of sequence of theory and hands-on is related to the CDIO standards. Now, the CDIO standards are considered best practices, and some of them are closely related to the sequence of theory and hands-on activities. The first standard that is clearly impacted and related to the sequence of theory and hands-on is standard 3, integrated curriculum. It means the disciplinary knowledge and the personal skills. Now, the disciplinary knowledge is usually more related to theory, and the personal skills is usually more related to hands-on activities. Also, standard number 5, the design implement experience, has a strong connection with the sequence of theory and hands-on. How does this design implement experience start? With focus on theory or focus on hands-on activities? The same number 6, standard number 6, the engine. Furthermore, this project is covering the syllabus item 3.1.1, forming effective teams. So students had to identify team roles and responsibilities. It's covering team operation, because students had to choose goals and the agenda of their team. They had to practice effective team communication, as well as planning, scheduling, and execution of the project. And they had to formulate solutions to problems that were coming up. It's also covering the syllabus item 4.3.2, defining function, concept, and architecture, because students had to identify necessary system functions and behavioral specifications. Furthermore, it's covering the design process, and students had to choose requirements for each element or components derived from system-level goals and requirements, as well as analyzing alternatives in design. And last but not least, it's covering the item 4.4.3, the utilization of knowledge in design. Why? Because students had to utilize technical and scientific knowledge and to practice creative and critical thinking, as well as problem solving. So the coverage of this item is somewhat typical for PBL projects, even if the nature of the project is different. Those that are typically covered by PBL projects. Now I'm moving to the third part of my speech, the CDIO and PBL environment. And I want to section of my speech. I want to look at both the impact of the sequence of theory and hands-on, and secondly, the impact of feedback. So let's start with the impact of the sequence of theory and hands-on learning activities. Now, when we look at literature and also at anecdotal evidence, then it seems that the theory needs to be covered first before on learning activities. Now, before I come to the experiment we did at ACK, and which seems to indicate actually something different than what we find usually in literature and what we usually find among engineering educators, I quickly want to show how the impact of sequence of theory and hands-on is related to the CDIO standards. Now, the CDIO standards are considered best practices, and some of them are closely related to the sequence of theory and hands-on activities. The first standard that is clearly impacted and related to the sequence of theory and hands-on is standard 3, the integrated curriculum. It means the disciplinary knowledge and the personal skills. Now, the disciplinary knowledge is usually more related to theory, and the personal skills is usually more related to hands-on activities. Also, standard number 5, the design implement experience, has a strong connection with the sequence of theory and hands-on. How does this design implement experience start? With focus on theory or focus on hands-on activities? The same number 6, that number 6, the hands-on activities require different learning workspaces than theory learning activities. Learning experience is related to the question of the sequence. What comes first, theory or hands-on? Or the other way around, hands-on and then theory. As well as standard number 7, the enhancement of faculty teaching competence. Dependent on the nature of hands-on activities, faculty teaching competence might be required to be enhanced. And last but not least, standard number 11, learning assessment. Now, hands-on activities need to be assessed differently than theory-focused learning activities. Now I come to the experiment we did in order to identify the impact of this sequence of theory and hands-on learning activities. So first I will describe the experiment with a few bullet points, and then I want to describe the findings. Now, as I said, we were looking into learning effectiveness between first hands-on group and first theory group. Showed for them, a first hands-on group yielded a higher score for more questions. So you see this again here graphically. The number of significantly improved questions was higher in the first learning phase, which was the hands-on learning activities, provided a higher starting point for the second phase. So they were actually on a higher level when they began the second learning phase, which was the theory phase. Whereas the starting point for the first theory group was lower when they continued with the hands-on phase. So in conclusion, the findings here suggest to begin the course with a hands-on focused learning approach. Now, we don't have the time to talk about the extent of the hands-on activity, if this is a small activity or a larger activity, that would be beyond the scope of my speech. But the starting point based on the findings here and the observation during this experiment suggests to be a hands-on activity before focusing more on the involved theoretical concepts. Now, I also should mention that this is based on the socio-economic context and a different setting, also regarding previous education, may lead to different results. Now, obviously, the theory is again the starting point for continued learning of or continued learning happening during hands-on. So we are actually looking at a cycle if hands-on and theory activities are repeated several times. The second point regarding the CDIO/PBL environment is the impact of feedback. Now, again, we find in literature and also looking at anecdotal evidence a lot of insights regarding the feedback, the importance of feedback. There is large agreement that feedback on student learning is important. It's actually very important that student needs feedback. There's also a lot of agreement that reflective feedback leads to higher learning effectiveness than corrective feedback. Now, what do I mean with reflective feedback and corrective feedback? With reflective feedback, I mean feedback that helps students to reflect on what they just did and on what they just learned. So it's not just telling them this answer is wrong, so correct answer is like that, but it's actually asking questions with the goal to help students to understand why an answer was wrong. So instead of telling them this is wrong and that is right, it would be, well, what do you think? Can this always be like that? Is this always true? Can you imagine there are exceptions? So that's what I mean with reflective feedback, in contrast to corrective feedback, which would just tell the students this is wrong. The correct answer would be like that, which obviously is much easier for the learning facilitator, for the educator, to tell them this is wrong, the correct one is that. But regarding learning effectiveness, literature seems to suggest that reflective feedback leads to a higher learning effectiveness. Again, I want to show an experiment we did related to the impact of feedback. However, before I do so, let me shortly show the connection with the CDIO standards, or the relationship with some of the CDIO standards, because there are strong connections with some standards and even with other standards. There are connections, obviously, with all standards, but stronger connections with some of them, some of the best practices. So one very strong connection is obviously with standard 5, the design, implement, experience. So when students actually do a project and get experience in designing and implementing something related to the learning outcomes of the course. There's also a strong connection with standard number 8, active learning, because the feedback is actually increasing the activeness. So instead of just providing assessment results, we are providing feedback, and this is increasing the active nature of their learning. And if it is reflective feedback, I would suggest the active nature is even on a higher level than with corrective feedback. Regarding standard number 10, enhancement of faculty teaching competence, now dependent on the type of feedback, professional development might be necessary, because reflective feedback requires a higher faculty teaching competence than corrective feedback. As I mentioned before, corrective feedback is much easier and can be done quicker in a more effective way. But regarding learning effectiveness of the student, reflective feedback would be more desirable. Also regarding standard 11, a learning assessment, when we do assessments, when we carry out assessments, it's important to think carefully about the type of feedback, and as we will see in a moment, also to think about the time of feedback. When is a good time to provide students with feedback on their learning assessments, whatever the assessment was? Okay, I'm not talking here about different assessment items. I'm just talking about the connection between feedback in general and the best practices of CDIO. Now, what was the experiment about? The experiment was actually a computer-based experiment. Students were exposed to a scenario. It was about developing a flow chart related to total quality management. And then the algorithm was providing feedback. For one group, it was providing reflective feedback. So questions, can this always be like that? What could be the downside? What could be a challenge? Whereas the other group, the other simulator type, was providing corrective feedback. And then we had a chance, based on assessments based on tests the students did. And again, there was a pre-test involved and a post-test involved. We had a chance to measure the learning effectiveness. And again, there was a replication of the post-test because we were interested in the effect of time on the learning effectiveness. So we did the first post-test 1 week after students were exposed to the topic, after students learned about the topic, which was done by providing a traditional lecture. And the second post-test was 4 weeks after this lecture, 4 weeks after students learned about this topic. Now, what were some of the findings? The first finding did not really surprise us. Corrective feedback encouraged to memorize correct answers. That's in line with literature. The second finding was reflective feedback led to deeper understanding. And again, this was not surprising. This is in line with a lot of research that is published. The second point was a little bit more surprising because we found that the corrective feedback and the reflective feedback was actually not that far apart. Both were actually leading to quite similar learning effectiveness based on the traditional assessment that was carried out, which was again including multiple choice and true-false answers. However, the learning effectiveness after 4 weeks was much lower than after 1 week. There was a significant difference, and that was quite an interesting finding because it's showing that the timing of feedback seems to be more important than the type of feedback, again, related to the students that were part of this experiment, related to their socioeconomic context and their learning history. So that was quite surprising because we were expecting that the type of feedback, so reflective feedback versus corrective feedback, would be more important than the timing, but actually the opposite was found, that the timing of providing feedback is extremely important, and it makes a big difference if students receive feedback 1 week after the learning took place or 4 weeks. Now, I come to the conclusion, or actually I like to offer several conclusions. The overall theme of this CDIO regional meeting is the CDIO in a post-pandemic learning environment. Now, obviously, in general, the pandemic can be a reason to reflect, not only on learning, but reflecting in general, reflecting on life. Okay, so this obviously is more important than just learning and more important than engineering education. It can be a great chance to reflect on life and our relationship with our creator. So that's a much bigger scope than the small scope of engineering education and the even smaller scope of my speech today. But what does the pandemic mean for engineering education related to feedback and related to the sequence of theory and practice? That's what I want to focus on during the last 4 slides. Well, first, I mentioned at the beginning there is overlap between PBL and CDIO. Both are complementing each other. I suggest through the pandemic, this overlap has increased because the content of learning needs to include now virtual meetings, using related software, etc., because this is more required now by industry and has to be included in the learning outcomes. Now, this was also necessary to follow a PBL approach. In order to practice PBL during the pandemic, virtual communication was a must. It was impossible without virtual team communication, without virtual feedback, etc. So I suggest the overlap between both concepts actually increased during the pandemic, and probably this overlap will stay in a way during the future. Regarding the hands-on and theory sequence, before the pandemic, with the classic hands-on nature, students got their hands dirty. During the pandemic, computer simulation had to be used. Now, post-pandemic, it probably will be somewhere between computer simulation and the classic approach. Where exactly remains the big question. Similar regarding the feedback mode, reflective feedback versus corrective feedback. Before the pandemic, feedback was largely face-to-face. During the pandemic, it was largely online, or during the lockdown, even exclusively online. Post-pandemic, it probably will end up somewhere between online and face-to-face. So probably a hybrid solution to feedback modes. However, the important thing based on the experiment and our findings that I presented earlier, the feedback type and timing seems to be more important than the actual feedback mode. So that's something we should keep in mind. The focus should not be exclusively on the technology used to provide feedback, but actually, are we providing reflective feedback, and are we providing feedback close to the learning experience? So with that, I'm coming to the end of my speech. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to provide answers to any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Martin, for your valuable speech. We have around 5 minutes for the Q&A session. I remind you, dearest attendees, to use the hand raise feature to express your intention to ask your questions, and you will then be given the permission to use your microphone and camera. Dr. Osama, the floor is now yours to ask your question.
Thank you. Martin, very interesting presentation. I'm just wondering, will you be carrying on forward over time, retesting the suppositions? Some of them are counterintuitive, like the theory vis-a-vis hands-on. Will you be retesting that every so often, and all your other hypotheses? Because it's very interesting.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Osama, and thank you to all of you. Before I answer your question, I still would like to add that I'm very thankful for the support we got for this project. It was actually funded by KFAS and funded by ACK, so thank you very much for the support of this project. So to answer your question, yes, there should be replications, and there will be replications. As always, it's just a matter of time. And so maybe not necessarily here with the same students, because that also would be difficult since they graduated already. But some sort of replication will be done in the future in order to verify this, and also to see the long-term effects, because obviously we are interested in long-term learning effectiveness and not just until graduation.
Vielen Dank.
Gerne, gerne.
We can take one more question. Does anyone have an extra question?
So maybe Dana, maybe I can. Oh, there is a question. Okay, yes, Mr. Abdul Mazid, please.
Mr. Abdul Mazid, the floor is now yours to ask your question.
Hi, Professor Martin Jagger. Thank you very much. This is a wonderful experiment you have done and wonderful results, actually. My question is possibly query is about after those, what you have already done. So what we do in the university, we teach students to be graduated, how much responsibility we take for the life university of the students. The life university of students, I mean the work, career life, the future, how he will develop himself, how he will pace himself. Every 5 years, 10 years, technology changes. How these graduates, either PBL or CDIO, do you think how they can cope with?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think this is touching on the point of commitment to lifelong learning, which is actually one of the learning outcomes in some courses we offer at ACK. And it's definitely one of the more important learning outcomes because this is related to the future, and not just students' own future, but shaping the future of society, etc. So that's something students have to learn, and the learning facilitators need to be aware of this learning outcome, not just regarding commitment to lifelong learning as a learning outcome, but also regarding pedagogy. Okay, the pedagogy needs to have this in mind. And again, this is bringing me to the point that reflective feedback is so much more important than corrective feedback, although it might be more demanding and more stressful for the learning facilitator, and also more demanding for the students, actually, because they are required to think and to think critically. But in order to instill a commitment to lifelong learning in our students, I think it's something we need to be aware of, and we need to emphasize on this. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Abdul Mazid.
Thank you, Mr. Abdul Mazid, for your question. Professor Martin, we have an extra question. Would you like to take it?
Oh, of course, I'm always happy to answer questions.
Okay. Dr. Baska, the floor is now yours to ask your questions.
Yeah, good morning, Professor. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Baska.
I'm very thankful to for your giving the wonderful talk about this. I want to have some more clarification, sir. So we are giving in the pandemic period also, we are giving the animation based on the labs, virtual labs we are conducted. The students also happy because they are unable to do the hardware. Like you cannot do any microcontroller based project or any Arduino based project. They are not able to do. So they've done the simulation based projects. So they are very much happy. Students are happy. And what kind of feedback we can get it so that we can enable the students to get the knowledge. So we are getting different kinds of feedback. So what kind of the interest we can adapt so that we can enhance the students' knowledge. So what part they are interested in?
Yes, I'm not sure if I understood your question. You are asking about the feedback based on computer simulations, you mean?
Yes, sir, yes. How to the students' point of view.
Yes. No, unfortunately, many of the learning simulators and educational games use very simplified feedback, which is unfortunate because it's not really contributing to the aim of effective learning. So I think there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. to improve the effectiveness of feedback and to turn it more into reflective feedback, and probably artificial intelligence can play a role in that. Because the feedback really needs to make students thinking. If they just remember what they heard and remember one was wrong, the other one was right, then I don't think we are preparing our students well for the future. So even when using simulators, and if the simulation is providing feedback, I think this is a must that needs to be included.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Dr. Bhaskar.
I'm S. Bhaskar from Vedtech University, Chennai, India, Chennai. Sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bhaskar. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhaskar, for your question. Thank you, everyone, and special thanks to Professor Martin for answering all questions.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Please note that we will be providing soon the email addresses of all keynote speakers on the event website, in case you would like to discuss further with the speakers. Moving on, we're now going to take a break. We will resume with our next keynote speaker at 10:45 a.m. Kuwait time. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Susan Brink, Associate Professor at Center for Educational Development, Umeå University, Sweden, who will present her speech entitled Curriculum Agility and the Impact of the Pandemic on its Bears on the Road.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. And I am going to share my screen. That one. And I hope that you will see my presentation in presentation mode right now.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I'm so thankful for you to invite me to come and speak at the CDIO Asian Regional Meeting. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Suzanne Brink, indeed, and I work at Umeå University in the north of Sweden, where we have a lot of snow right now already. And I've lived here for 2 years now. Before that, I came from the Netherlands. And I am affiliated still with Leiden University, where I do a PhD candidate research. But my background is multidisciplinary. It's design, it's industrial design engineering, and it's educational sciences. And I am CDIO EU, European region co-leader at the moment. And it's very, very nice for me to be in the CDIO network, as it's dab in the middle of my interests in curriculum innovation, in which I do a lot of research. But today I'm going to talk about a big part of that research, actually curriculum agility. And I've added the impact of the pandemic on its bears on the road. And I realized that I need to explain a little bit what I mean with that. So in Dutch, we have a saying that you can see bears on the road, and it means that you have these concerns and obstacles and barriers while wanting to do something or to change something. But the barriers are so big and they're scary and they seem insurpassable. And to talk with the words of Robert Sanger yesterday during his presentation, which was so interesting, they feed our avoidance motivation. We don't approach, we tend to stay away. So having lived in a village in the north of Sweden for 2 years now, where an actual bear family resides, and as fascinating and as cool as that sounds, even little change and innovation-minded me has found it myself to rather avoid really meeting them. So yeah, I can understand why when we have these bears in our mind, when we see these obstacles, the first reaction is, yeah, let's not do it. The other part of the title was about curriculum agility. And for that, I will take you back a tiny bit into 2016, 2018, when I was working at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, also as a CDIO person there. And I was working with industrial design engineering, where I was head of program. And we co-created a curriculum M, we called it. It was a flexible curriculum. It was dynamic in content. It was integrated, competency-based, authentic learning. Students owned their learning and even their own assessment. We offered them multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary activities. The program was international. There was a lot of entrepreneurial activities in it. Sustainability was high on the agenda. We used the CDIO framework to make this. Well, all in all, it was a rather innovative curriculum. And it looked a little like this, where you see students choosing their own competencies that they want to prove at their assessment. And then they show to the teachers, to the assessors, what they have learned in the past 5 weeks in a very complex, wicked, authentic project that they're doing in a group, but their assessment is individual. So without getting too much into details of the program, it was a wonderful change. We saw behavior in students we hadn't ever seen before. And Professor Jaeger before the break was just talking about things like getting them to practice and then offer them the theory. It works, I can tell you. So I can vouch for that. And then in 2020, when COVID happened, the whole design of this dynamic and choice-based semester-based curriculum also proved to be pandemic-proof. There was a smooth transfer to online and self-directed learning. There was no cheating problems on examination because there was already this system that made it virtually impossible, no, really impossible to cheat. It was easier access with the international projects that we had with, for instance, Liverpool University or projects for the EU. All of a sudden, people were able to Zoom very easily. And of course, we had to take some events online that you would rather do in real life, just like we are all here now behind our computers instead of seeing each other. But that was doable. So that was great. And when I presented at several CDIO conferences and other conferences in engineering education about this curriculum, I often got questions. So how did you do that? Because I don't think it's possible where we are. You must have a different national context. There must be different laws. You must have a more lenient system or no lack of resources. It was a good question, actually. Why were we able to do this? And put it forward out there so quickly, because we made it in a year and a half. And together with two other CDIO members, Chalmers University and Umeå University, at that time I was still in The Hague, we decided we would think about this. We would compare our curricula and then we called it agility, but then in the way that an animal can respond to its environment very quickly and adapt very good. So not in the software agile way. So we called it curriculum agility, and we looked at our curricula and compared them and saw and tried to see what was it that made it happen in some places and not in other places. And we had a lot of participants, about 20 in that workshop in Kanazawa. And together we formulated what is that curriculum agility. And we said, okay, this is about curricula which are responsive and adaptable to characteristics and needs of society and industry and students that are changing so fast. And they are that by having the capacity to change structures and to change perhaps learning outcomes, assessments, learning activities, and do that in a timely manner. And that, of course, is a concept which needs some filling in, but that also depends on each context. We offered them this overview. We said, okay, so when we talk about curriculum agility in this way, then there's three elements. You have the dynamic content, because what you teach them changes so quickly in technology, etc. So that needs to change along. And then you have the flexible education. That's a term that was more known, but that really focuses on customization towards the student and the diversity of students that we get in, their changing needs in the future, and making the program and course elements flexible. But then we said there is a third element, and that's the responsive organization. And we mean responsive in the way that it's willing and it's open for a dialogue about change and about how to do this. So not only what is offered, to whom it is offered, and how it is offered, those three elements. So that was the first workshop, and then we decided to keep doing this. So we had a series of what I later defined as a snowball method focus group sessions, so expert groups. Every time we would have a workshop or something alike, there would be all these experts, participants of CDIO meetings who knew everything about engineering education and their contexts, come to us and work with us on this concept. So we had a working lunch in La Rochelle at the EU meeting. And then in 2019 in Aarhus, the concept of the working group started, where you have a whole day before the conference starts in which you work on your topic. So we did that. And then because of COVID, it became online. So Trondheim, January 2021, was an online workshop. And last June in Bangkok, we also did an online roundtable. We went outside of the CDIO network just now in October, and we hope to have another working group day coming up in in Reykjavik next June. So from Aarhus onwards, the group was a little bigger. So now we're with 7 people working on this from the universities that you see here. But it's all rather European, but it wasn't because of the worldwide conferences. We had participants coming from all over the world. And that's really nice because it matters a lot, the context in which you are. And we want this all integrated in this concept. So working with the participants in all these workshops, we saw that they are changing a lot of things to make education more agile, to make it more responsive and dynamic and flexible. And here you see some things that we, in a questionnaire, asked CDIO and CEFI members, what are you working on? And they said curriculum agility and flexibility, assessment and examination, employability of students, internationalization, industry engagement. Those were the top 5 of things they were working on. But you see the others here mentioned, which were also on the map. And then we asked them, okay, so while working on this, do you note, are there any barriers? Are there any barriers on the road? And then they said yes, especially staff and skill and competence, engagement, regulatory processes, blocks in those, development time and costs, operating resources of the model. Those were the barriers on the road that they found out or that they foresaw that would happen. And then the other ones that you see here, student acceptance, senior management acceptance, etc. Those were things that they also feared would play a role. And in those workshops, we dove deeper into this, and here you see clustered several barriers on the road. So on management, quality and support, the internal approval processes, accreditations, things like that. So both internal and external. Then the 5-year cycle, there is this, you can't change a program halfway. So it always takes time. Then the student's perspective, are they able to manage if there's so many options offered, if things change all the time? How do we achieve that they still reach that required level for an engineering degree, etc. And like I said before, the staff, and we've heard more about that this morning as well, that there is work to be done and always will be. And then there was some diverse things, like scheduling might be a problem if we want to get more agile. It could be old ways of the way that things are done that are just not changeable or don't seem to be changeable. But also thinking about, okay, but if we have this change, how will we make it stick? Why won't people just veer back to what they're used to when it gets a little rough? So what we did in the end is we formulated first 7, and now they are 8 principles of curriculum agility. And I will go through them with you, but you see that they're grouped into vision and strategy principles, curriculum design and research principles, and curriculum support and quality principles. So in the vision and strategy, first of all, and this is almost parallel to how CDIO works with the standards, you need to have this idea, you need to have this vision of wanting agile education, wanting to be able to change to this. So that has to be sort of in the heart. And then there needs to be a management approach that's one of a change culture rather than having a one person, one experiment, one thing. When that person goes away, nothing happens anymore. So you want it to become a culture in the academic teams and make it proactive. And the third one is stakeholder involvement, and that goes far. That says, okay, you have to co-create with them. So involving both internal and external stakeholders from your university in this change process, and doing that in a structural way. Now, of course, there's all these bears on the roads that might come up in your head that you think, okay, but we can think that we want responsive education, but this is not in line with the whole university's vision, for instance. Or another Dutch expression, I will be the lonesome caller in the desert. I will be the only one asking for this. Or our industry partners don't want this. They just want somebody who's ready next year to come and meet their needs that they have right now. So there's different things that could hold you back into these principles, but they are important. Then we have support and quality, empowering an the organizational structures so that you can effectively address the administrative system. That the administrative system has to become responsive, super important. And then the decision-making process, how lean can you make that? How many steps are required? How many layers does a change in curriculum have to go through? And here bears on the road can be, okay, but this is just a law, it's the way to do it. If we want to change it, it will take years. Students won't probably like it, or it can't be administrated in the current systems, etc. Last one, design and research. Program and course design, making that with dynamic content and in flexible structure. So formulating holistic learning goals, for instance, competency-based, with replaceable indicators that can support the dynamic teaching content so that students still reach the learning goals they are supposed to, and then that's written down that they have to, but you can offer it in with different content, etc. And then the didactic flexibility, course choices, adjustable, customizable projects, all for the opportunity for the student to learn effectively, but also to build his or her own profile for the job, for the market. Then pedagogy and didactics, the scholarship of teaching and learning. And we've had some great talks this conference also, this meeting, about what it is that we need to do differently. And that takes support. That takes for teachers to learn how to do this differently and to try it out and fail and try again, etc. So scholarship of teaching and learning becomes super important. And then the eighth principle that we have added this year because of also under influence of the COVID, the pandemic, we saw that learning spaces become super important. And of course, the physical learning spaces were already, and we were working a lot on having flexible spaces where students can do different active learning activities, etc. But this also goes for the online learning spaces and now the hybrid learning spaces. We've gone from emergency online teaching at this point where the pandemic is almost over, but not yet really. We go to this emergency hybrid teaching, which is not easy at all. I would like to invite you to go to this Menti. You can either go to menti.com and use the code 36469212. Or you can take a picture of the QR code. And there's 4 questions. And please, if you are okay with us perhaps using the results of these questions, then answer them. It will be completely anonymous, so it will not be traced back to you at all. It's just to get a feel of what's going on in our CDIO members in the Asian region. So while you go there, and I hope everybody has written down, but I'm going to go to the Mentimeter presentation now, and there you will also see the code still. So here above you still see the code coming up. And then the first question to answer is which curriculum agility principles were you working on pre-pandemic? And I've written all of them down, and there's also a none of the above option. And as people start to answer, we will see a ranking of what most of you have been working on pre-COVID so far. I'll give it a bit of time. You can rank all of them, or you can just rank, for instance, the most important 3 ones, or maybe you were only working on one. So you just, it doesn't matter how many answers you give, you can just submit it. Okay, we have at least 20 people who have answered, and thank you so much for participating in this. It's kind of weird not to be able to see your faces. I usually would be able to. But we see by far that the program and course design, so building dynamic content or making the content more dynamic and working on flexible education that gives some autonomy to students, it gives them some choices and a chance to profile themselves. That's number one. And learning spaces, which is great because it's such a new principle for us still, is on second place. So the physical and digital learning spaces. And third is scholarship of teaching and learning. That's great. So we'll go to the second question, and that is now, almost 2 years into the pandemic, which curriculum agility principles are you working on mostly now? So it could be the same, but it could also be something else that you've had to stop doing what you were doing and focus on something else much more. So again, it works the same way. You can give as many answers as you like, rank them, but you can also just put one in and then submit already. Okay, this is super interesting to see that learning spaces has become number one. And of course, we all had to work on our digital learning spaces incredibly. But of course, the dynamic content and the flexible education has remained very important as well. And we see that thought of having to go towards agility, realizing that you need that in your vision and in your strategy as a university has climbed up considerable here. All right, so let's go to the next question. Before the pandemic, which were your biggest bears on the road? So your biggest concerns or worries or blocks, obstacles you saw when you were making changes in your curricula? And it could be small changes. It could also be a redesign of a curriculum or making something completely new, perhaps. So again, it works the same way that you can rank the most important bear on the road and choose how many you think are important in your case. So this is pre-pandemic, so you have to go back into your memories a little, perhaps. Give it a little bit more time. This is a new list to work through. It's quite a few items as well. But while the last ones come in, we see that administrative system limitations has been the main concern and the main obstacle in curriculum change. And another big one is staff motivation and engagement. Do they want this, and what is their motivation to do it? And then third, we see, and that links to that, of course, is their resistance to change. It matters a lot who you work with on your curriculum changes when this happens. All right, last question. Now we're after nearly 2 years of pandemic, and now you've had to make a lot of choices in your curricula. What were the biggest bears on the road? What were the biggest obstacles? Or what are the things that you worry about most right now? Both are good. So it's the same list of items, but now at this point. It's super exciting to see this, because this is like a dynamic element in my keynote speech, where I don't know yet what the answers will be, but it shows us the most recent data possible, and I think that's really worthwhile of getting it. So I'm taking a bit of time of my presentation out of this for this. So what we see rising up to the surface is learning spaces, student acceptance, and still passing quality assurance and accreditation. Is it okay, all the things that we changed and we had to change so quickly, will we still pass the quality bar? We see that staff motivation hasn't completely disappeared, but it's not as high up anymore. But student acceptance has become much bigger. Do they accept the changes? And that, of course, has a lot to do also with how quickly it all went and how well they were informed beforehand. So there we go. Okay, now there is a fifth question, but that's an open question, and I won't wait for the results, but know that it's anonymous. If you, during the remainder of this presentation, or already have some thoughts, remarks, additions you want to add, or some bears you think are really important but were not in the list that you could choose from, please feel free to write those here, and then I will see them afterwards. And then I'll go back to our presentation. So thank you for your input. Now, in January 2021, so 9 months ago, I asked likewise questions to the European regional meeting participants in my workshop at that time. And they indicated that mostly pre-COVID, they were working on scholarship of teaching and learning, which was also high in our results just now, and in structural stakeholder involvement in change processes. So that's interesting that one didn't come up as high here. Here it was other things that were more important. Learning spaces, of course. Priority under the pandemic. So what became a priority? That was that principle 1, to be agile. So that also ended up high here just now. They also said flexible courses with dynamic content became more of a priority. And the principles 4 and 5, so the organization and governance and the decision-making processes. They became important. It wasn't easy to work with them. They had to ignore some bears there. But overall, flexible teaching and to a lesser extent, dynamic content were getting attention pre-COVID already. And scholarship of teaching and learning remained in focus. And that, of course, there has been such steep learning curves for all our teachers and a lot of instrumental improvement, but it also still needs follow-up. How do you really pedagogically use all these new tools that you're now able to work with. They indicated that what was neglected was stakeholder involvement, and also the organization and decision-making processes, because there was paddock football going on. It wasn't a structural approach. A lot of things were organized that had to be brought back later on. With an eye on the time, I will not go deeper into that. But what they showed was that more attention for curriculum agility, scholarship of teaching, and flexible solutions, and less so for stakeholder involvement and the support and quality ones. Now that stakeholder involvement has become so hard, that's actually kind of a problem, because how can you make your changes last? Now we go back to that curriculum that I co-created with my academic staff. And there, of course, we also had bears on the road. It wasn't a very easy breezy process. In our case, it was the exam board that was really a big obstacle for us. It was the policies and laws that we didn't quite know where could we change things and where we absolutely not allowed to. And then it was the staff competency development and the resources to do so. But how we solved that was by actually co-creating with the people who are behind those bears. If there is an assessment policy that has been written by somebody and it's going to be updated by some persons, so you have to work with them if you want to change things. So we work together with alumni, with students, with prospective students even. On open days, we ask them about their expectations, etc. We co-created with the lecturers who were going to teach in the new curriculum, but also with the curriculum committee and the head of program. And you see here the red words are the ones that we actively co-created with. And the black ones are the ones that gave feedback at some point, or we informed them, kept them informed, etc. And then there's some gray ones, which are still could be stakeholders for your context, but in our context, they weren't important. They weren't there. We, of course, worked with our international industry. We were an international program, so working with international companies a lot. We were also working a lot with non-governmental organizations like Doctors Without Borders. So we had them at the table, entrepreneurs, visionaries in the domain. Those were all active co-creators that helped us to design our curriculum. Educational advisors within and outside of the university. University strategic agenda owners that needed to be revamped, and we made sure that we were at that table thinking along with them and being able to implement it right away. Assessment policy owners, and even the program and examination regulations, which is the legal document in the university in the Netherlands. We co-created with them. We sat together and said, okay, where is there room for us to do what we want to do, and where do we have to adjust our plans? And then scheduling office, IT services of learning platforms, facility management for the rooms, the multifunctional rooms, great administration system people. So we co-created with them, and that made that we could come up with a curriculum that everybody supported and everybody knew how to implement. And it was, it was facilitated that it could last. So that would be my final thing for today. The bears on the road, they change, and they have changed with COVID coming up. And every other reason for us to have our agile curricula will bring along other bears, perhaps. They might change a little, but you have to approach them, and you have to co-create together with those stakeholders. And then there's just a few rules, and that you could, in very easy language, say, okay, it's okay to be afraid for the bears. They might also be a little afraid of your changes. Find your room to play together, co-create, play together, play nicely, have empathy for each other, see what each other's needs are, see if you can meet in the middle, play by the book, stick within the rules, do not break them, but you can reframe them together, and that's where you have to go. And then be patient, but keep the game going. We did it in a year and a half. That was a bit mad, but it is good to keep the momentum when it's there. So identify the bears in that principle where you see that within your context, there's not that much agility yet. Then co-create together. And then you might be surprised what the bears are actually capable of doing. For the remainder of the second phase of our project, really, we have come to realize that there's not a one solution fits all. That's why we came up with principles to begin with. But now we have to see curriculum agility development within the universities as a journey-like process. It's evolving interests, there is evolving possibilities and obstacles, bears, and there's evolving purposes. So we need to find this way of mapping the curriculum agility, having a checklist perhaps, or maybe even the self-assessment rubric, but at least a checklist, so that we can create the insights and value and value the possibilities that are present within the context, and that will enable us to truly design agile curricula. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Susan, for your valuable and interactive speech and for respecting the allocated time. The floor is now open for questions. I remind you, dearest attendees, to use the hand raise feature to express your intention to ask your questions, and you will then be given the permission to use your microphone and cameras. Any questions from the audience?
Hello. Good afternoon or good morning in your time. I don't know. This is Dr. Hassan from the Australian College of Kuwait. Indeed, I would like to ask you, during this pandemic, what was your biggest bear on the road that you faced, and how you overcame this this challenge?
During the pandemic, I've been working on several curriculum innovation projects, both at Umeå University and Luleå University here in Sweden. And there, the biggest bear on the road was that we had to work online. So just as counts for our students when we teach them, being able to socially connect, if you want to have a co-creation going on, you need to connect to each other. You need to be able to show each other respect, even if you're at the table with people from very different layers within the university. And you need to welcome everybody's input at an equal value. And to do that online, that proved to be a very big obstacle. People perhaps didn't have their cameras on. You couldn't see them. There wasn't time for the sort of the chit chat in between the sessions, where often a lot of the problems that arise or worries that somebody still has might come up. That didn't happen, that interaction, and that was a big obstacle. So I do understand that people said, like, okay, stakeholder involvement has become ignored or fell off the table, because it was pretty hard to do that also online.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for your question. Dr. Fadi, the floor is now yours to ask your question.
Hello, Dr. Susan. This is Fadi from ACK. Thanks for the nice speech. I have a question about graduation projects, especially in the pandemic. It was a little bit challenging to deal with graduation projects, especially in the School of Engineering. I mean, we tend always to push our students to come up with, build their prototypes, test the prototypes, go to the workshops more, and so forth. But during the pandemic, it was a little bit challenging. I would like to listen to your experience in this regard. How did you guys deal with it? And most important, how this might impact the future preparation of the curriculum. How can we deal with graduation projects alternatively within, and keep it in mind when we prepare the curriculum for the future? Thank you.
Thank you. That is a super interesting question. I think if I look at Umeå University, where we also did a research after a year, asking all our faculties how they were dealing with this. And Umeå University is a broad university, so we don't have only engineering. We have all the faculties. There was distinct differences between the faculties. In the engineering faculty, the losses that were felt were mostly in not being able to go to the labs to finish or to make that prototype for your graduation project. So the physical lab, and once the university found out that they tried to get that going first again, so that students were able but had different time slots in which they were there on their own or with max 5 people, depending on the sizes of the rooms, etc. So their solution was not to come up with a reframing of a graduation project, but with measures that still made it possible for the students to have that practical experience and add that. And the same happened in our medical faculty. And there it was actually really priority that students still got the real experience and could actually show it in real life. So there a lot of safety measures were taken, but it was still possible. In the arts, for instance, it was not allowed, and then it becomes hard. Then you cannot really make the things you would be able to make regularly. So it would become a watered down version, or what can you do at home, etc. I've also heard of some programs where they sent out materials and instruments, or they borrowed them out, so that students at home could still work. But the interesting part of your question is, does this mean something for how we formulate our graduation projects, what we expect from the students? And I think it's complex because it depends on how your learning objectives are written and what the student still needs to prove. In some programs, a master project, a graduation project, is a confirmation of being able to integrate everything you've learned before. But in some programs, it's also the final showing of the competencies you haven't shown before yet. So that you would need to have an assignment that would still cover those competencies that still need to be proven. So I think what you would need to do there is also look at what happens in industry. Are the projects as they were written, the graduation project, still representable for what they would have to do in industry in our post-pandemic world? Otherwise, adjust them accordingly. Yeah, and look at which level your learning outcomes are written. Can you make them more abstract, more holistic, so that the student is actually able to prove that in multiple ways and not only by making this one real-time prototype, for instance. That would be some of the directions I would suggest that discovering with your team.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and special thanks to Dr. Susan for answering all questions. The time passes extremely fast during this very interesting event. Our event is almost reaching its end. Please help me welcoming back Ms. Helen Leong and Professor Issam Zabalawi, who will give us the CDIO Asian Regional Meeting 2021's closing remarks. Ms. Helen and Professor Issam, I will leave it up to you to decide on who will start the closing remarks first.
Let me start, and then Ms. Helen will continue with that, if you allow me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Let me say that colleagues and participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Australian College of Kuwait and the organizing committee, it gives me an immense delight to highlight some closing remarks on the CDIO Asian Regional Meeting 2021, post-pandemic higher education. It seems that time has speeded up today. Our meeting is coming to an end. I want to thank you all for your active participation. Although it would have been wonderful to meet you all face to face and welcome you in our beautiful campus and hospitable country, the alternative, nevertheless, has been a success. Over the last few days, we have interacted, engaged, and exchanged meaningful discussions. Moving forward, there is an unquestionable need for us to reflect the outcomes of these presentations and discussions in our teaching and learning environment by integrating them into the CDIO standards and syllabus in order to update the initiative and to strengthen the role of our institutions in serving engineering education and the profession worldwide, taking into consideration the challenges which emerged due to the COVID-19 pandemic. From our part of the world, we are strong advocates of the CDIO, and we will continue to raise awareness within the region so that our other universities can join the initiative. Post-pandemic, the main challenge for higher education institutions is to remain relevant and to produce graduates with the right skills and appropriate attitudes. Equally important, as highlighted in many presentations, is to focus on the soft skills and to develop emotional potential of our students while creating a motivational climate that allow them develop their passion, as highlighted by Mr. Songer. We need also to work on advancing the digital learning environment and embrace hybrid learning, as explained by Professor Thomas Röberg. This meeting has been a very good step in the right direction in highlighting the paradigm shift required for higher education institutions. Perhaps for our next meeting, we should consider inviting experts from industry, engineering professional agencies, and some alumni. Listening to all excellent presentations, there is a shift in the dimensions related to CDIO, such as embedding research, achieving personal growth, creating a culture to innovate development, developing emotional competences, and understanding data. CDIO is a model that fosters the spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship. However, applying this model properly means that we need to train our faculty so that they can develop the skills to teach CDIO, as highlighted by Professor Clement Fortin. Furthermore, developing faculty industry knowledge and competences give us a way to more develop, as emphasized by Dr. Johar. As a faculty and instructors, we really need to think about the feedback approach to students, and most importantly, the timing and the type of the feedback to maximize its impact, as explained by Professor Martin Yoger. We hope this can be built upon in the next meeting of the CDIO Asia region. Professor Sen Mo from Singapore Polytechnic also discussed the CDIO portal. This is a great platform to exchange information where presentations can be uploaded and people can have an access to it. The members can learn from the width and the depth of the experience of the Singapore Poly. As we navigate uncertain times, we find ourselves at a standstill where we have to innovate ourselves to remain fit for the purpose and establish the basis for positive transformations within our societies and towards education 4.0 centered around the human values as highlighted by Professor Camp. As universities, we are key players in driving innovation, propelling development, and impelling the jobs for the future. We play a key role in the economic and social developments and in driving economic and social transformations as articulated in the UNESCO's Sustainable Development Plan. I believe that with our determination and dedication, we can transform challenges into opportunities. In his presentation, Professor Mushtaq Al-Aitabi spoke about students writing their impact statements. Perhaps as universities, we should adopt the same practice and have our own impact statement so that we can constantly find meaning in our purpose. We must continue to be ready to keep our minds open to change because change is the only constant in our life. We have a lot to do to ensure that higher education sector and our students are ready for whatever and the future holds for them. One of the main goals as higher education providers is to produce students with innovative perspectives. They need to be creative thinkers, open-minded, resilient, adaptable, and courageous. We need to embed on them to be skeptical and to reach to the required conceiving level and never settle for the status quo. If this is our expectation of them, then we need to demonstrate the same qualities and characteristics. As higher education providers, we must have an impact beyond our walls. We need to highlight that teaching now more than ever is centered around coaching, mentoring, encouraging, and facilitating our students. Our curricula need to be responsive, flexible, and dynamic, as illustrated by Dr. Susan. The students should be taught to become learners for life and master of concept learning, de-learning, and relearning. And this is the essence of and the strength of the CDIO. Dear colleagues, as we wrap up our meeting, I want to thank all who have been contributing to make it possible. Our speakers and participants from different parts of the world, from Kuwait, Russia, Netherlands, Japan, Finland, Sweden, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, India, and the Gulf region. I want to thank our School of Engineering and our IT department and our MC at the Australian College of Kuwait for their immense work they did in preparation for this meeting. Special thanks go to Engineer Omar Al-Kandari, the Acting Secretary General of the Private Universities Council in Kuwait, for patronizing the meeting. Mrs. Helen Long, special thank you for your leadership, insight, and ongoing support. A meeting like this pushes us to think beyond the prospectus and listen and learn from another while contemplating what lies ahead in our future and that for our students. On a final note, I want to stress the importance of the positivity of adhering to the needs of the job market by updating our standards and syllabus so that our graduates become socially, professionally, and emotionally responsible. Even though CDIO was initially established to serve engineering education, now we are at the point where we can invite experts from outside engineering to develop initiatives adhering to the steps followed by the CDIO. I hope that all build on the work done over the last few days and draw lessons from the practices from the one another. Thank you all very much. I look forward to the CDIO 2022 Asian Regional Meeting. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Professor Isham, you did such a wonderful closing. I don't know whether I can add to what you've done. You know, so I would like to sincerely thank the organizers, Professor Isham and Professor Nibi, right, for putting together a really very engaging and inspiring program. Yeah, I think in the last 3 days, we had a lot of food for thought and ideas, I think, to take back to implement in our own universities and institutions. I remember Professor Mustak's talk and how he talked about emotional intelligence and how he cleverly used watt, kilowatt, megawatt, gigawatt, you know, energy units to define the level of competence for his university's Empower program. And I think that was really wonderful. I enjoyed your talk, Professor Isham. I think you did a very passionate talk on research-based learning. I've never heard someone who's so passionate about education, and I really admire you for that, you know, and how it relates to CDIO. I think that to me, research underpins a lot of what we do in CDIO and CDIO skills itself. I also enjoyed my co-director for the CDIO Council, Eldad's talk, you know, when he said, he asked us to think about the importance of 21st century skills, you know, beyond the domain skills, of the 21st century skills, and what he called the let go and grow education. And I think that's so real. Sometimes we have to let go and then our students will grow, okay? And I must commend my colleague Sinmo. I was amazed that he took the bold step of, you know, trying for the first time to use Mentimeter, you know, for a large group and an international audience. I must take my hat off. You know, that's really brave. Yeah. And you know, I was amazed and pleasantly amazed, very pleasantly amazed, at that the theme of this meeting was on post-pandemic higher education, and I really expected people sharing more about technology, etc. But no, I think the focus to me, and rightly so, was on the personal, the professional skills. I think you raised it just now, the professional skills that our students and our graduates need to have, you know, for their future. I think that's so right. You know, skills like critical thinking, learning agility and upskilling, entrepreneurship and innovation. I think those are the skills that will hold our students and graduates, you know, for the future that they're going to go into. Looking back, the first regional meeting was hosted in Singapore by Singapore Polytechnic in 2013. That was 9 years ago, and we have been holding this regional meeting annually for 9 years. Can you imagine that? And I was amazed when I asked Johan for the sign-ups, and whoa, there's still a very good sign-up rate for the event, and I'm amazed, you know, and I can sense amongst all of us here that deep sense of interest, the deep interest among all the participants here, to want to learn from each other, so that we can design better curriculum, better learning experiences for our own students and our own graduates. I think that draws us all together, and that's the power of CDIO. I would want to thank really a big thank you. And I know how important this is because we also run a lot of online meetings and conferences. The background work that's being done by your technical team, they contacted me and say, hey, you have to log out, log in, and they've been fantastic. So I must thank your technical team who's been doing a lot of background work. I think who has been working tirelessly in the background. Thank you so much. I think the transitions between speakers and sessions have been very, very smooth. And a very big thank you to Dana. Dana, I think you did a fantastic job, keeping us on time and getting us moving. Yeah, so a big thank you to Dana as well. Finally, I would like to thank all of us here, all the participants who have taken precious time from all your busy schedules. I know all of us are busy, all of us have teaching commitments and other things to do. Taking time from your family to immerse yourself in CDIO. And I hope you found the richness that CDIO can offer to us as educators, as practitioners in the classroom. And I think I particularly liked what Yuha and Suzanne just shared. It just brings out that richness and the practical aspect of CDIO and how it relates back to us as educators. I must admit that I've been attending CDIO conferences and meetings for more than 10 years. And every time I attend, just like this event, I learn new things and take back new things. So I really thank all of you for putting a really wonderful program together, and all the speakers who have contributed. I think it is really bringing together a lot of experiences, a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge, and sharing it with each other, and for everyone else who are here to ask questions and to learn. I look forward to, I hope, more universities from the Gulf region joining CDIO. Yeah, I do hope I see more of them. And I look forward to really meeting everyone at our next regional meeting next year, 2022. So with that, I wish everyone stay safe and keep well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Assam and Ms. Helen, for this touching closing remarks. We are now going to have the CDIO Leaders Meeting 2 for those who are CDIO initiative members. This meeting is accessible via another link shared by the meeting organizer and not in this virtual room. This wraps up our event for the CDIO Asian Regional Meeting 2021. Thank you all for joining us and being a part of this event. It's been a pleasure to host this event, and I wish you all benefited from the valuable speeches and presentations given in this meeting. I wish you all a pleasant day and looking forward to welcoming you to other future events hosted by the Australian College of Kuwait. Have a great day.